like youth groups are being managed on Instagram, right? Because all the kids are on Instagram, and like, well, that's not right.
So this question was sent in by a listener to our podcast, a podcast we do every Wednesday called The Pro Church Tools Show, and it reads, quote, recently, Doug Smith was on the podcast Theology in the Raw with Preston Sprinkle. It's over an hour-long, really interesting discussion. I would love to hear your considered response in light of Smith's argument that many of the emerging digital platforms are designed to be addictive and hamper discipleship and our mission as churches, rather than further it in healthy ways, end quote. So, as one of the bigger advocates for churches embracing digital platforms, I'm here to respond. Of course, I started by listening to the full podcast. I'll encourage you to do the same. Theology in the Raw with Preston Sprinkle is the name of the podcast. The guest in this episode is Doug Smith. Doug is the author of the book Unintentional: How Screens Secretly Shape Your Desires and How You Can Break Free. And he's a software engineer at Covenant Eyes, one of the larger adult content blocking and filtering websites. And let me say this to start. This is an hour-long podcast, and there's very little in the first two-thirds that I don't agree with. It's the stuff at the end that I found myself disagreeing with the most, where he begins to specifically call out TikTok, Instagram, Facebook Reels, YouTube Shorts, the platforms that have begun embracing discovery algorithms. So, let's listen to that.
Do you think that churches should use, I think there's probably two different approaches to this. One would be churches or Christian leaders helping people to just wean themselves off of these platforms. Or the other approach is they're going to be on Instagram anyway. What if we as a church sent out like daily devotions through Instagram, or maybe even had a podcast where they can, have a 2-hour conversation after this, on Monday morning where pastors are bantering around about the passage they just preached on or something, or maybe a whole different thing. It's not sermon related. Should we be using the channels they are already on, or trying to tell them to get off the channels as a whole? Or is it kind of a both and maybe?
I would be much more in the lines of as far as not using the addictive technology to try to get our mission done. Okay. There's a debate over should we be sharing the gospel on TikTok, for example?
Right. Yeah.
Can you share the gospel on TikTok? Well, Marshall McLuhan said the medium is the message, which means it's what you have to do to succeed on a platform is to be the way that platform is, to put yourself in the mold of what that platform does. So the way that platform works is short attention span, quick hits. Nobody's going to, again, it's not about reason, it's about feeling. So what are you going to do? You're going to be sensational. You're going to have to get their attention. What do I have to do to get their attention? Well, you have to be obnoxious. You have to be, you have to push the envelope. You have to do whatever. For me, I'm like, this is intentionally addictive technology. We need to reject it.
Okay.
And we need to go towards platforms of like podcasts and that kind of a thing. The problem with the church using this technology, again, this is based on my research. The problem with let me just take a quick step back. A lot of books and a lot of people trying to talk about technology is a tool. It's amoral. It's just how you use it, right?
But that's not true, right? We've already kind of.
It is not true, Preston. Yeah. It's not true. I mean, yes, a pencil is a tool, right? The printing press made a huge impact on the culture. It was not designed to be intentionally addictive. TikTok is designed to exploit you. Okay. Instagram is designed to be intentionally addictive. These is a very big different thing. So we have to understand, it's kind of like, all the kids are sitting around smoking crack. Should I go and smoke crack with them and share the gospel? Well, okay, Jesus would probably go and talk to them, but I don't think he would be smoking crack. And so it's kind of that same, and in fact, some of the books I cite, it's the same, the brain chemistry, the dopamine cycles, the things that are happening to kids especially, but also adults on social media and video games. It activates the same systems in the brain as heroin and drugs and right. So no, I would say the church needs to understand that this is not just a tool to be used to be bent to our will. This is not the tool you're looking for. Okay. The tool you're looking for is authentic relationships, conversations, face-to-face conversations, and real discipleship. In fact, I love what you said. I just was in preparing for this conversation and refreshed on Embodied. You talk about if people don't have authentic communities, they're going to look to the internet to find it. Yeah. That's what the church needs to be about.
Yeah.
So let's get this out of the way off the top. Doug Smith and I agree on a lot of the things that matter most. And if you watched my previous video from last week where I reacted to Louis Giglio's comments at Passion about digital, again, specifically targeting Instagram, TikTok, and discovery algorithms, you perhaps will recall me using the terms digital hygiene and digital literacy. Two things that are crucial if we are to faithfully navigate today's digital landscape. But what do those terms actually mean? Practically, what might they look like? So let's start there, because again, Smith and I seem to agree on some of the more major points of this discussion. And so to that end, here are 3 basic tenets of digital hygiene and literacy that I think all of us should keep top of mind and use to inform our behavior online. Number 1, indiscriminate use of digital media will be harmful. Number 2, if you don't make conscious decisions online, they will be made for you. And number 3, if you're not paying for the product, that's because you are the product. Here's the bottom line. Digital platforms do not hold your best interests or well-being as a priority. And I think the grave error that we've made as a society in the last 20 years in respect to digital media is our indiscriminate use of it. Now, this is typically how it goes with new tech and emerging industries. The other recent example that I commonly cite to illustrate this, though on a much smaller scale, is drone technology. You know, just a few years ago, suddenly, the average consumer could put a camera on an aircraft. That's disruptive tech. And there were no laws or cultural norms concerning this because it was brand new. And so, after a few years of this new tech being used without any boundaries, rules, or regulations, lawmakers got real aggressive with policy and really clamped down on the use of UAVs. And frankly, they probably overcorrected because, in an effort to protect folks, they stifled an emerging industry, which that also has negative ramifications. And so then after a while of these ultra-strict regulations being in place, we see them starting to loosen some of the policies, while still keeping the important ones, and thus completes the cycle of new tech and industry. Indiscriminate use to stifling regulation to then some semblance of balance. And a line of comparison that I like to draw when discussing digital media is to the automobile industry. Because the automobile industry is today well regulated. But imagine if it weren't, the dangers that would come from that. You know, if we as a society indiscriminately embraced automobiles without any rules of the road, requirements for licensing, insurance, age limits, alcohol level limits. But there was a time when automobiles were new and society was trying to figure that all out. Now, this is from an article called "The Horseless Carriage Means Trouble," written by H.B. Brown, a retired United States Supreme Court Justice. And just listen to how automobiles are being discussed. This is hosted in the New York Times Archives Online. Quote, "To those who occupy or drive them, they are undoubtedly a fascinating amusement. The speed of which they are capable intoxicates and bewilders the senses and deadens them to the dangers which surround the machine, and by a sudden mishap may turn in the twinkling of an eye into a terrible engine of destruction." End quote. They intoxicate and bewilder the senses. Could that not also be describing discovery algorithms and social media and their addictive nature? You know, Brown goes on discussing the legal ramifications of this new tech. Quote, "It is a fact too notorious to be ignored by the courts that the excessive speed of automobiles costs the lives of many persons, and that scarcely a week, sometimes scarcely a day passes without chronicling from 1 to a dozen deaths occasioned by the reckless driving of these machines." End quote. And what about the departure from that which is real and organic to machine? Back to the retired Supreme Court Justice. Quote, "The automobile lacks one of the most attractive concomitants of pleasure driving in the companionship of the horse." End quote. So, what are the primary critiques here? An intoxication or bewilderment of the senses, dangerous to society, and a call to get back to the real world. The same major critiques that we hear about digital media all the time. Now, don't get me wrong. That's not me simply suggesting that, hey, there's always going to be new tech and those that resist it, and that justifies always embracing it. No, but the reason I like comparing the auto industry to digital media is because both are virtually inescapable in our society. Sure, you can live without a car, perhaps without your own driver's license. It is possible, just like divesting from digital media entirely is possible, but it comes with a cost, and it's not easily done, which is why most people don't do it. Here's the other reason why I liken the auto industry to digital. Consider the following question. Was the rise of the auto industry a net positive or net negative for our world? I don't know how I would answer that. I don't even know how you'd begin to answer that and try to untangle a fabric of society that is so central to our everyday lives. Similarly, though, has the rise of digital media so far been a net negative or a net positive for our world? I also don't really know, but what I do believe is that I have the power to determine if it's a net negative or net positive for me. And this is also why I don't care for the comparison of big tech to something like big tobacco or soda. Eliminating smoking or drinking soda from your life or my life, that's doable. Divesting from driving an automobile altogether or refusing to even get your license, that has much greater complications. And so does the implication that the best response to social is to eliminate it from our lives altogether, which is essentially Doug's argument. Now let's get back to more of what he has to say.
Yep. Is that why something like sharing the gospel on TikTok it's designed to be short attention span, get your attention, boom, and get out of there, and that communicates something about the gospel itself when you're presenting the gospel in 15 seconds, whatever? Is that kind of the argument that the very medium here, in a sense, cheapens the message you're trying to communicate?
It's not even that it cheapens, it packages it so that it says something different. It's trivializing it, but it's also, so it's, imagine what you're doing. As an experiment, I used TikTok for 5 minutes and uninstalled it just because as for my work, for my day job, I'm a software engineer for Covenant Eyes. And so, which is like one of the largest internet pornography accountability software. So I was doing an experiment and I hadn't installed TikTok before. So I actually wrote a big article on it on my blog recently to kind of describe what's going on with TikTok, for example. The other platforms are doing it too. In fact, Instagram and YouTube want to be TikTok because TikTok's being so good. Like everybody's becoming more TikTok-like because TikTok has figured out on the next level of addiction. But so I installed TikTok. You put in your name and your birth date, nothing else. No gender, nothing. First video that comes up is 2 women in bikinis. One of them grabs the other one's shirt and tries to pull it down. I swipe away. No. Okay. Next video, cute dog video. Next video. It's all about swiping videos. And again, it's analyzing that. So imagine you're swiping along, and there's a pastor sharing the gospel. And then you swipe and you see, and then you swipe and then you see, and you've forgotten, right? My contention is that platform is designed for one thing. It's designed for addiction. It's designed to be distracting. It's not designed to share the gospel. So I would, and even in the case of doing that, I mean, the argument is, there's 2 billion people on this platform, so we need to be there. Well, if the only reason, like I said, the only reason you really need to be there is to tell them to get off of that and to go and live and understand what's happening to you. This is the reason you're on here, and the reason you think this is awesome is because they've made it. They're exploiting you. You're being manipulated. It's hurting you, and it's not good. When we say, okay, we're sharing the gospel on this platform, we're saying this is good. We're blessing it. We're sanctifying it. We're saying this is a thing. And my argument is we really need to watch out for that. We need to really be careful with that.
So let's look at the values here that Smith is espousing. First and most importantly, discipleship. Now, Smith wants people surrendering their lives and behaviors fully to Jesus, and I am on board. He then describes this specifically, quote, you're looking for authentic relationships, face-to-face conversations, end quote. So that's the standard that he's defining here by which we as churches should be aspiring to. Doug also mentions Marshall McLuhan's famous quote, the medium is the message. The principle here being that broadcast mediums are not amoral or neutral tools, but that the fabric of the medium itself matters. So Doug argues that a platform like TikTok or any that elevates a discovery algorithm is not amoral, but in fact morally corrupt because it was designed to exploit you. And thus, the church should not be on these platforms because by virtue of our presence, we are endorsing them. He goes so far to say that sharing the gospel on a platform like TikTok does not just cheapen the gospel, it distorts the message to say something different. It trivializes the good news. And his contention is that TikTok and discovery algorithms are designed for one thing and one thing only, addiction. Finally, Doug says this, quote, when we say we are sharing the gospel on this platform, we're saying this is good. We are blessing it. We're sanctifying it. We're saying this is a thing, end quote. So here's my understanding of Doug's position. Discipleship is what matters most, and for sure, authentic relationships and face-to-face conversations. The medium is the message, and churches being active on a platform is an endorsement, and what a medium is designed to do is ultimately what matters most. So if a platform was designed to be addicting, because that's how it was designed, it should be rejected. Finally, Doug does also put podcasting on a pedestal as a digital platform that he seems to enjoy personally and endorse for churches organizationally. And this is important, okay? Because Doug is not recommending churches abandon digital altogether. He does not critique digital as a whole, but rather he would suggest your church embrace a medium like podcasting, reject a medium like Instagram, because they are designed differently. Now, here's what he says about that when Preston asks him about the difference between short form and long form content.
Well, I think there is a market for that. Certainly, there's a market for the long form. I would say the podcasts they don't fall into the intentionally addictive patterns. They're not exploiting your dopamine cycle. They're not messing with your behavioral psychology. They're not looking at, what it's a conversation. So I think that's why I think podcast, the medium is the message. Yeah. So the podcast is the medium, and you have a whole different way of doing that. And certainly you have different audiences. Churches should have podcasts, for example. I think that's totally the medium to share the gospel. Yeah. Where TikTok is, again, it's a whole different thing. I think what's the goal? What's the reason for that? So I would suspect it's different audiences in general. Yeah. But the thing you ended with, are they looking for meaning? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that I really reach out to people in terms of their trying to connect with them in my book is that, people wake up after however many years of addiction and they're like, you know what? I thought I'd be farther along in my life by now. I thought I would have done this and that. I thought I would have graduated. I thought I'd be married. I thought I'd be blah, blah, blah. But no, I've got high video game scores and no, but I'm still in my parents' basement or whatever. It's like all those kinds of things. It's like, there is this sense of longing, but then because they've been discipled into the use of this technology, they think the answer is there as well, when actually it's the problem.
So here's what I find most unconvincing about Doug's argument. He's specifically targeting TikTok, Instagram and Facebook Reels, and YouTube Shorts, the platforms that have embraced discovery algorithms. Why? Well, because as the medium is the message would dictate, these platforms are designed to be addictive, designed to keep us using them, and thus should be rejected. He contrasts that with podcasting as a tool churches should embrace. So let me explain why I'm unconvinced by this. Scientists at the University of Michigan say that more than 100 million Americans live with noise levels that are louder than what you would hear standing next to a working washing machine or dishwasher. We have, in fact, become so used to living with noise that most of us now find comfort in constant blare, according to a scientist in Australia. This researcher had hundreds of students spend a little time in the quiet and write about their experiences, and nearly every student said the silence made them uneasy. The lack of noise made me uncomfortable. It actually seemed foreboding, wrote one student. Another survey, and this is the one, found that Americans increasingly see the TV not as an entertainment device, but as a companion. More than half of us keep the TV on while we cook, work, and do chores because we feel uncomfortable in silence. So at one point, Doug says at the 2740 mark in the interview that podcasts as a medium are a, quote, really special oasis in our time of technology, end quote. But are they? Because if the goal is, as Doug said, authentic relationships and face-to-face conversations, are podcasts not a cheap substitute for that? Like if you are a podcast listener, as I am, have you ever thought to yourself, man, it feels like I'm right in the room with these people. It feels like I know them. That has been said to me when I meet listeners of our show in person on many occasions. And I've thought it myself about the podcasts that I listen to, because I listen to podcasts everywhere I go. Why? Because that's how they are designed to be consumed. And the medium is the message, right? And podcasts are especially insidious because I can take them everywhere. With my TV, at least that has to stay in my living room, right? Not a podcast. I can walk, shop, lift, clean, cook, and never be alone. Like that survey said about TVs in the background, we increasingly see the TV not as an entertainment device, but as a companion. And more than half of us keep the TV on while we cook, work, and do chores because we are uncomfortable with silence. If that is not a grave threat to our desire for discipleship and face-to-face conversations, then what is? If TikTok trivializes and cheapens the gospel, then what do podcasts and TV and the radio do to discipleship? Now, you might push back. Hey, that's not TV's fault. That's not podcasting's fault. If we're abusing this tech, that's on us. No, the medium is the message, and this is how these mediums are designed to be used. Companionship, wherever you are, a cheap substitute for in-person relationships. Now, let's consider this for a moment, okay? Could a movement toward entertainment platforms like TikTok and away from social platforms, could that not be a positive thing? Could that not, conceivably, push us back to making meaningful in-person connections again? Because TikTok has come out and they've said, we are not a social platform, we are an entertainment platform. So just think of the last 20 years of social media and connecting with people online. Now, what if I told you that we would stop trying to initiate connections online and instead get back to the real world? Would that not be a good thing? Would we not all rejoice? The positive take is that the younger generation saw how their elders did community online and have rejected it. They're voting with their time and saying, TikTok and social, by extension, is for entertainment, not for relationships. Why did these older folks think they could substitute social for real friendships? Now, you might not find that convincing. It's perfectly fine. The point I want you to take away from this video is this. All of digital media is guilty. Podcast is an oasis? No, it's just as fault. Perhaps more so, because it doesn't simply try to entertain, it's substituting for real connections with people. Could you not argue that's worse? Look, the entire scope of human history, save for 100 years, was devoid of digital media and the radio. It's not TikTok that finally pushed us over the edge. Yes, discovery algorithms are a new twist, a unique expression, and they demand their critique, absolutely. But these platforms are all guilty. And I really do find it bothersome when the new thing comes out and the kids are the ones that embrace it, and we adults look down on them and go, wow, what a pitiful generation. And we say things like what Doug says when he equates being online to high video game scores and just living in your parents' basement. Like, come on, we're still making that critique in 2023? Meanwhile, for us as adults, our closest confidant is our companion, the TV, or our companion, the AirPod, in my ear 24/7. My biggest gripe with a critique like Doug's is that it works great at pointing fingers at the new tech and the new generation and identifying their problems, and it turns a blind eye to the adults in the room and our problems. Because when you narrow your critique to a single platform like Doug does here, you let everyone else off the hook. This is the enemy. It's this platform, and the people that use this platform need to stop. And now we're so focused on the speck in the eye of the other that we're blind to the problems of the platforms that we advocate for. We're all guilty. These platforms are all guilty. And if we want to uphold the values and standards that Doug espouses, which I am fully on board for, by the way, we must then interrogate these platforms equally. And not just target the kids that are on. Not just target the ones that were around when we were young. In fact, I'd argue that it's easier. It's lower hanging fruit to cry foul about the new platforms, because the problems with the new platforms are easier to see, right? Because they're unfamiliar. So they're obvious. The greater danger, though, is that we ignore the platforms that have been with us for decades, the ones we've come to accept, the ones that have had their hooks in us for so long that we're not even aware of how harmful they truly are, because they are our familiar vice. Thanks as always for your time, attention, and trust. Love to hear your voice in the comments, and we'll talk soon.